Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 30th of January 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column Live. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish, and with me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
And Nick Green, of course, is behind the technical desk. Now, we will be joined during the programme by David Scott, who's going to give us an update on the very brave anti-child abuse campaigner, Robert Green. So we'll be calling him into the programme shortly. But first of all, we'd like to start by saying, well, when we get it wrong, of course, the UK column is prepared to accept that we got it wrong. And of course, key issue at the moment is bad weather. There's been many reports. This is a typical one here showing obviously snow and a problem at the airport. And basically, we've seen a number of these reports: storms, bad weather, gales, rain, etc. Now, let's take you back to the Telegraph. Of course, the Telegraph at the end of last year was blaming this on the beavers and squirrels. This was their article. And they then tried to redeem themselves a little bit later in January by saying, here is a proper Met diagram. And we took the mickey out of the Telegraph for blaming global warming on beavers and squirrels. Well, we would like to say that the Telegraph was absolutely right, because we can now show that it is in fact British beavers. Beavers are now present in Britain, and they've been working with their Russian counterparts to help create the bad weather in Britain and global warming. So there you have it. Those bad Russian beavers are now tied up with British beavers, and I believe that's in Cornwall. Extraordinary, Mike, isn't it?
These would be terrorist beavers?
These will be domestic terrorist beavers. So there we are, an apology to the Daily Telegraph for their analytical report.
Yeah.
Well, let's get on to the really serious stuff in Britain. And that, of course, is that the British state is still working flat out to cover up child abuse. And, of course, anybody who dares campaign for the exposure of the abusers and to call upon the police and Home Secretary to put the criminals in prison is likely to end up in prison themselves, as very brave campaigner Robert Green did. So this is one of the articles that's appeared. We'll now call in our guest, David Scott, to give us an update on Robert and where things are on child abuse in Scotland.
Good morning. Good afternoon, Brian. How are you today?
We are very well, and you're looking well. Thanks for joining us. Short, sharp programme today, so tell us what you can about the situation around Robert Green and his forthcoming trial.
Well, the trial's partway through now. We had an initial hearing on the 13th. The main reason for that was to see if the bail conditions would be relaxed. Now, they weren't, but what came out of that initial hearing was a whole series of decisions which were not at all good for the defence, and have quite serious implications for freedom of speech as well. It transpires that anything that's published on the internet, YouTube video, web blog or anything else, has been viewed by the Scottish courts as though it was published locally. So therefore the jurisdiction of the Scottish courts would appear to be the Globe at the moment over the internet, and that eliminated a lot of the defence lines that Robert's team were following. And the outcome of that initial hearing was Robert's team really said that there's no way he's going to be found not guilty, and their concern was that he should change his plea to guilty in order to avoid further jail time, which for health reasons and also for the reasons of the campaign he wishes to do. Because you'll have to recall that since Robert was incarcerated back in February, the situation in Britain and in Scotland has changed a great deal. We now have not one but two national child abuse inquiries, one of which is in Scotland. The feedback we are getting is the Scottish one wouldn't exist without Robert Green and his campaign, and Robert wants to be able to interact with that inquiry, submit evidence to it, and he doesn't want to be locked up in a Scottish prison when it's starting. So he was very keen to avoid that in order to continue the campaign. And there was also a concern that if he got a stiff sentence again, the conditions placed on him might so curtail his freedom of speech, he might not be allowed to interact with the inquiry in any way. So that was the main concern. So he decided to change his plea to guilty, as it appears that his web blog has been a technical breach of the non-harassment order. The other bit of information that came out of that hearing and the subsequent one is that about 95% of the complaints against Robert raised initially by the Crown, including all the most serious ones, have been withdrawn. It seems that the Crown has accepted that they're without foundation. Now, those included claims that he had made threats, that he had contacted people in the non-harassment order, people accused by Hawley directly, that he'd been to Aberdeen and was campaigning there, all of which is nonsense. It's just not true. So we're left with a very small residual complaint against him relating to his web blog and relating to letters he sent to the constituency rep of Alex Salmond, and which he sent to other political figures, including Alistair Darling. These highlighted the reports in legal magazine The Firm regarding Alex Salmond's breach of the Freedom of Information Act concerning Hawley Gregg. And that seemed to go down very badly with the political powers in Scotland, and may well be the reason that Robert is in his current predicament. Okay. So we've only got the sentencing to go. There doesn't seem to be very much actually against Robert now, apart from the blogging. And the defence team, rightly, I'm sure, consider that a freedom of speech defence would not be successful in a Scottish court at the moment. Right. So hence the guilty plea. I think there's a lot of questions still to ask here. For example, Robert was locked up for 96 days on remand and given very draconian bail conditions. If all of the charges which have now been abandoned by the Crown as without foundation weren't on the list to start with, it seems unlikely that that would have happened. We would need to find out, I think, if the Crown has done their job in assessing these complaints, and indeed whether the complaints themselves have originally been malicious.
David, thank you very much for that very concise report on Robert's present position. I'd just like to bring this on screen. We're going to have to move quite quickly because this is just a 30-minute news today. But this was The Firm, and indeed you sent this through to us. It is Ian Hamilton QC saying effectively that the justice system stinks. He says that who advises the government on matters of law? The Lord Advocate. Who brings prosecutions in this country? The Lord Advocate. Who employs the Lord Advocate? The government. Who pays the Lord Advocate? The government. So he's been pretty hard-hitting there on saying that the Scottish justice system stinks. Just in two sentences, what is your opinion? 2 sentences.
Yeah, the final line there is who protects the people from abuse of power by the government, which is the Lord Advocate, if you believe in fairies. The Scottish system was based on a very complete separation between the Lord Advocate, who's a lot of power, and the political aspects of the government. That separation is gone now, and this is very bad news for freedom in Scotland.
Yes. Okay, well, if you're happy to stay with us, I think you'll find that the news that's coming in from across the rest of the UK dovetails very nicely with this very worrying subject. This is corruption in the courts. Now, we were kindly, on the left, you can see a picture of Tom Crawford defending his house against bailiffs. Of course, what were they using? They were using fraudulent court documents, no court seals, no signatures. And this is the other bit that's come up. This is actually to do with John Hemming, who's supporting a man who's trying to access his court records. It's now come into Parliament, but we know that court records are simply being denied to those taking part in court hearings. Records are missing, or they're saying they're destroyed. This is fraud and corruption in Britain's courts. Good to see it now coming into Parliament. If you want to know more about this, have a look at a 45-minute video, which is now up on UK Column, the British Constitution Group, where I interviewed Guy Taylor, who is setting out very clearly how this corrupt court system works. And for those people who are coming to the Constitution Group conference at the end of this month, we will be handing out a booklet describing exactly how the system works. So worrying times, we've got corruption in the courts, we've got secret courts. We jump across to Alex Salmond here. You've just mentioned him and trouble over freedom of information requests in Scotland. Well, that is important, of course, but now we're seeing something very interesting. Here we are back on the breakup of the United Kingdom and exactly how the UK column forecast some 5-6 years ago. We said the agenda would be eventually to get rid of Britain's nuclear deterrent, so that Britain was forced to rely on the French and, of course, the European military network. So here we see smiling Salmond, still got immense power within the Privy Council. We haven't seen the last of him, but enough on that.
Yeah.
Mike, what have you got for us?
We're starting to see government really starting to push TTIP. So what is it? For those that don't know, TTIP is the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. It's a proposed free trade agreement between the EU and the USA, allegedly. The aim actually is to create a transatlantic free trade area, which will include NAFTA, which is the North American free trade area, the members of the European Free Trade Association, that's Iceland, Norway, Switzerland and Liechtenstein, as well as the EU and Britain. Now, there's been quite a bit of concern voiced, even in the mainstream press about it, and justifiably so. TTIP is, they say, is about regulatory harmonisation. It's about actually giving corporations a say in the regulatory frameworks around trade. In fact, in December 2013, we started to see leaks, particularly on this regulatory coherence. But this week, actually, a new leak has come from this man, German Green MEP Michael Ryman, and he has leaked the EU's paper on the regulatory cooperation on financial regulation. This is what he's saying, really. The basic aim, the parties commit to engage in a process towards convergence of the respective regulatory and supervisory frameworks for financial services. And then he says what's troubling is that the joint EU-US Financial Regulatory Forum shall agree on detailed guidelines on mutual reliance adapted for each specific area of financial regulation no later than 1 year from the entry into force of this agreement. So, in other words, people are signing up to a treaty without actually knowing what's in it. And Michael Ryman is saying, so a parliamentary resolution to accept TTIP would become a blank check. We would create a body whose way of working we don't know. We would only learn a year later when we would have to implement it. Every MEP that agrees to this proposal is giving up his or her independent mandate. And then this week as well, we've had a second leak, and this time it's on the Corporate Europe Observatory site, and it concerns the overall approach to regulation. And it's a direct assault on national sovereignty. So according to the Corporate Europe Observatory, new regulations should undergo an impact assessment, which would be made up of 3 questions, and Article 7 from this document, and it's reduced from 7 in an earlier proposal. Now, this is still a draft document, but nonetheless, it's quite significant. So the impact assessment has 3 questions, and they are: how does the legislative proposal relate to international instruments? How have the planned and existing rules of the other party been taken into account? And most significantly, perhaps, what impact will the new rule have on trade or investment? And those questions are primarily tilted, according to the CEO website, primarily tilted towards the interests of business, not citizens. Thanks to the early information procedure, businesses can make sure that their concerns are included in the report, and should it go against their interests, the report will have to cite a detrimental impact on transatlantic trade. So what we have here, Brian, in fact, is a new global, initially with TTIP, a new transatlantic governance. Yeah. And if we're concerned about the EU pushing a layer of government on top of national sovereignty, we've now got what's proposed here is a new layer on top of that again. And of course, we should remember that it's not just on the Atlantic side, because also on the Pacific, we've got the TPP, which is the Trans-Pacific Strategic Economic Partnership. And so what we're actually looking at here is a new layer of global governance, not just EU, US, Atlantic governance.
And in our faces, of course, this is hidden in plain sight. Once you start researching the material, this Orwellian plan comes easily to the surface. But what is the government doing with the mind of the general public in Britain? Well, we are being fed circuses and bread and circuses, I think is the expression. Just have a look at this one. This is the state of Britain's Royal Navy. We're captioning this, Meet Royal Navy Captain McDonald's, captain of HMS Daft. Is this real? Well, just have a look at this. The Mail reporting here that the Royal Navy has been forced to ditch the first batch of new US-style uniforms with baseball caps after they arrived covered in mould. Well, never mind the mould. What about the mentality that is pushing this stuff on Britain's Royal Navy? The MOD went as far as to say the uniforms were a daring fashion statement, and not only that, they were cool and more modern. So we've got Trident being moved from Scotland to Wales. We've got our nuclear deterrent under threat. What is the Ministry of Defence doing? Well, of course, they are simply saying that
they're dumbing it down.
They're dumbing it down.
Yeah.
And my goodness, that officer certainly looks embarrassed in that ridiculous outfit. What's going to come next? Skirts, do you think, Mike? For easier movement around the ship, we could have the officers and ship's company of warships in skirts. Well, perhaps that's appropriate for the Sun.
Well, yeah, the front page of the Sun today, Her Royal Work Shyness. Now, I'm quite interested in this front page because while it has been said by other people that the royal family is the nation's most expensive benefit cheats, this is really what the point that the Sun is making here. They're saying, Princess B has decided to give up her job, but she's still going on 3 posh halls a month. Well, that's exciting, isn't it? But, what is actually this about is my question. I believe this is the Murdoch press being deployed once again, just as they were on the run-up to Leveson, just behaved pretty badly. They have picked on her because of an outcry. Well, it could bring about an outcry of harassment related to the allegations against Prince Andrew. I think that's what's going on, and the press regulation agenda hasn't gone away. It's still there, and some journalism is of better quality than others, shall we say? And I think this falls into the trap. Yeah.
But manoeuvring behind the scenes of immensely powerful global media people.
Yes.
Well, okay, if that's happening in the press and you need to control the press to build a dictatorship, meet the Black Widow Spider, who is the Home Secretary. Remember that she's been bigged up in the press recently because she says you should report crime online. And while she's doing this, what is she actually doing in reality in the background? And that is building a vicious state spying apparatus. Have a look at this comment, which has come from the Herald Scotland. Orwellian anti-terror plans are outlined in a consultative document which accompanies Home Secretary Theresa May's counter-terrorism and security bill. So we're going to say well done the Herald in Scotland, and well done journalist David Ross, because he's really hitting very hard. Anti-terror legislation, Orwellian, draconian, repressive and a direct threat to freedom of speech. And part of the article says, under the Home Office proposal, staff at preschool nurseries will be required to monitor children for signs of radicalism. Speakers at universities will be vetted for any signs of extremist views that would support or encourage terrorism. Well, if we add a bit to this, of course, the UK column has consistently warned about a dictatorship forming around Home Secretary Theresa May's plans. We called it treason softly spoken. But let's bring those comments back into focus, because according to the Herald, Jackie Brock, Chief Executive of Children in Scotland, said, "We suspect that the proposed duty is in reality aimed at parents and carers of children and young people, thus placing staff in services to be covered by the duty in the invidious position of being asked to observe and assess adults as well as children and young people. And she was supported by Mazar Khan of the Muslim Council of Scotland, who said, for the government to push this draconian law through while preaching to Muslims the importance of freedom of speech is quite bizarre. Well, our comment is, well done, Mr. Khan, but you're making a mistake here. The policy is not bizarre. It's calculated and targeted to oppress. And David, we'll just give you, again, just 2 sentences. What's your opinion on this? What's the feeling in Scotland over this law?
Scotland. So we already have a situation where the state is going to look at every child and every associated adult and investigate them to whatever extent they want. The state's responsibility goes up to 18 unless you join the military, whereas parents cease to be parents and children are independent at 16. The opposition to this is building in Scotland, and it's now being seen in the mainstream press as well. But the government, the SNP government, and before them the Labour government, are determined to push it through. Okay.
Well, we see grave danger building in Scotland, and I may have mentioned it before. 1 or 2 people have said to us, interestingly, a Spanish gentleman said that he sort of saw similarities between the regime unfolding in Scotland and Franco. Well, that brings us pretty nicely to what the UK column has consistently warned about. We've called it the smiling face of fascism. Have a look at these historic reports in the Mail. Cameron's new bid to silence hate preachers. We've got hate preachers to be silenced by new anti-terror ASBOs to block their bile on the internet. All of this being rammed home by Cameron's Liblab Con. And of course, let's remember Boris Johnson, children of Islamist radicals should be in care. And it's the strong view of many of those involved in counterterrorism that there should be a clearer legal position so that those children who are being turned into potential killers or suicide bombers can be removed from care. Well, where does that take us? Here are the children removed from UKIP. And what's going on here? Is the UKIP party now classified a potential terrorist threat by Britain's security services and GCHQ? Of course, all of this stems from the fact that we have a police state building where very few will control the pyramid of power. We've got a single police force in Scotland. We've got progress in England to create secret courts and a unified police authority. And in the press, I'm not going to read all of these, but we've had many comments from police officers saying they need to do more and more monitoring of the general public in order to keep us safe. Well, what are we saying? We're saying if you follow this through, we've got Britain's government and security services effectively saying all of the general public are now potential terrorist threats. What do they want? Well, they want us chipped. Welcome to Rory Selland-Jones, BBC technology correspondent. We think this man is one of the most stupid journalists going at the moment. This is what he's boasting at, which is that he's had himself chipped because he thinks it's great fun and he can work his office photocopier by the fact he's been chipped.
Yeah.
BBC propaganda, of course, to push the rest of us into accepting a chip.
But not just BBC propaganda, because, well, I saw this article there or two ago, and this isn't really about this article. It's not about Apple or their earnings, which I'm not really too worried about. It's about how the article was produced and the article itself, because this article appeared within a couple of minutes of Apple releasing their quarterly figures. And what's interesting is that there's no byline, there's no human byline, that is. The story was written by an automated system, Automated Insights, or AI, as they like to be called. So AI has had the Associated Press style guide built into a computer algorithm, and they've implemented this system 6 months ago. It's publishing 1,000 stories a month at present, and it's intending to publish a hell of a lot more in the future. Now, according to Automated Insights PR manager James Kotecki, there are millions of articles per week published by this system. Yahoo's fantasy football reports are automated by this system, and he estimates that the company system can produce 2,000 articles per second if need be.
Not propaganda articles, surely, Mike?
Couldn't possibly comment on that. If there are any journalists watching this programme, if you are not concerned by this...
You're an idiot, and we've seen one of those. He's a BBC correspondent.
Right. So here is the website of Automated Insights. You can see who their main partners are there, Associated Press being one of the main ones, Yahoo, Comcast, and so on. It is a staggering development, and this is not technology being used for positive purposes. We all expect technological progress. It is the 21st century, or should be anyway. But removing the human element from journalistic practice seems like a great move towards, again, the Orwellian 1984 newspeak type situation. Yeah.
Well, if we want to end on something of a positive note, we're going to say that it's obvious some journalists are waking up to what's going on. We've been talking over the last few weeks to a selection of mainstream journalists, and what's clear from their comments is that they are no longer laughing at the alternative media and reports in that media. So if you want to make an impact, don't brand all of the mainstream journalists and reporters as idiots and on the other side. Clearly they're not. They've been a bit slow to wake up, but I think some of Britain's journalists are realising that in a true dictatorship, investigative journalists don't live very long. What else can you do? Come to the British Constitution Group conference. Starts on the 27th of February and is over the weekend, including the 1st of March. We're going to be talking about what's happening in the country, but also what you can do and what we need UK column subscribers and British Constitution Group members to do, which is to get out there and spread the word and warn people about what's happening, plus a whole range of other things. But we'll introduce that over the coming weeks before the conference. And also, don't forget to keep a little bit of a light-hearted approach to what's going on. It's generally a very dark subject. We're just going to advertise Alex G's Mindful book here. If you haven't got a copy, you might like to get hold of it. And of course, also remember that Doomwatch is putting across the reality of politics in UK in a humorous way. What have we missed, Mike?
I think that's it.
Okay, so there we are. Don't watch the BBC. It's just not worth it. It's become too silly. And if you feel like tracking down those wicked beavers that are causing the global warming, Cornwall is the place to go. But you can Google that online, of course, and presumably a machine will talk to you.
Yes.
There you are. We'll be back on Monday, same time. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.